Tens of tons of reinforced steel and heavy-duty rubber characterize military transport vehicles that share more physical traits with tanks than standard logistics trucks. Why would engineers prioritize such extreme structural durability over simple mobility? At first glance, the massive frames and armored plating seem like an unnecessary weight burden for a supply vehicle. But in reality, these machines were designed to navigate cratered battlefields and move through mud deep enough to swallow an ordinary chassis. Without this excessive engineering, the front lines of 20th century conflicts would have remained completely isolated from fuel and ammunition supplies. One can notice how the thick metal plating on these trucks reflects the light, revealing a texture forged through decades of harsh service. Throughout the 20th century, global territorial expansions and large-scale conflicts forced industrial nations into a rapid technological race. It is visible how the development shifted from basic transport to the creation of mechanical beasts equipped with high-torque engines and sophisticated all-wheel drive systems. These components allow the vehicles to maintain traction even when submerged in water or traversing steep, rocky inclines. The process of military innovation is only gaining momentum. Many of these trucks have managed to survive the relentless test of time and extreme environmental conditions. Specialists and historians now categorize these specific models as rolling legends, searching for them across continents with the same intensity as they would for rare armored tanks. One can notice the slow movement of a heavy winch as it pulls a rusted frame from a forgotten hangar, signaling the start of a restoration that may take years to complete. These are not merely historical artifacts, but complex engineering systems that continue to command respect from modern mechanical designers. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the rarest statistics of these historical machines. The collection and preservation of such vehicles have become a global phenomenon, with enthusiasts competing for the few surviving units that remain in operational or restorable condition. It is visible how a single rare American model can command a price that exceeds the value of high-end luxury cars, driven by its unique role in history and its distinctive mechanical configuration. These trucks represent a physical manifestation of innovation in steel, serving as the heavy backbone of past military operations. The camera glides along the massive axles and reinforced leaf springs of the most iconic models in existence. This journey into the technical specifications and histories of the top 10 most legendary vintage trucks reveals the true scale of their construction. The process of documenting these rarities is just the beginning of understanding how they shape the outcomes of global events. From their high-displacement engines to their specialized off-road tires, every detail served a specific tactical purpose. Thus, the legacy of these massive machines remains preserved as they transition from the battlefield to the private collection. 4x4 drive systems provided the associated equipment company Matador with a level of respect that few British military trucks have ever commanded throughout the decades. Engineers at the Associated Equipment Company developed this machine in the late 1930s to fulfill a critical role in hauling heavy artillery during the Second World War. Its solid design and battlefield reliability transformed it into a vital component of the British war effort. Why does this specific vehicle remain a prized rarity for collectors of military hardware today? At first glance, the mechanical specifications appear dated, but in reality, the Matador was an engineering masterpiece of its era. The answer lies in its specialized construction that allowed it to survive conditions that destroyed lesser transport vehicles. One 6-cylinder gasoline engine with 7.6 liters of displacement sits beneath the heavy steel hood. This power plant produces approximately 95 horsepower, a figure that might seem modest by modern standards. However, it was more than enough to tow massive artillery pieces through terrain torn apart by conflict. One can notice how the smooth, low-end torque allows the truck to negotiate rough ground without stalling or losing traction. The process of moving these 8-ton loads is only gaining momentum. 40 miles per hour was the maximum speed this heavy hauler could achieve on level surfaces. A 5-speed manual transmission works in tandem with a specialized low-range gearbox to provide immense pulling power for steep inclines. The equipment gradually overcomes obstacles as the full-time 4x4 drive system engages with the earth. It is visible how the rugged leaf spring suspension compresses under weight, allowing the truck to carry heavy loads without structural compromise, even on muddy or uneven soil. The Matador possessed a distinctive visual profile that served strictly functional purposes. A short, tall cab is fitted with a split flat windshield and large front fenders to protect the chassis from debris. The flatbed at the rear provides a practical space for transporting ammunition or specialized artillery components. Depending on the specific configuration and the equipment being carried, the vehicle weighed between 7 and 8 tons. 5.5-inch field artillery and 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns were the primary loads towed by the Matador across North Africa and Western Europe. These weapons were crucial in halting enemy armor advances during the most intense phases of the war. It only looks obvious that such a machine would serve a single purpose, but in reality, its life extended far beyond the battlefield. But this is just the beginning of its mechanical history. Post-war life saw many Matadors undergo significant transformations for civilian applications. Owners converted these military survivors into logging trucks, industrial cranes, and even specialized camper vans for long-distance travel. Such extensive repurposing across the British Isles made original military specification examples incredibly rare in the modern era. Authenticity is now the highest priority for enthusiasts, especially for trucks that still bear original wartime markings, factory paint, and period-correct hardware. 70,000 British pounds was the staggering price reached by one fully restored original Matador at a United Kingdom military auction. This figure represents the peak market value for a truck built in the 1930s and 40s. Everything only gets more complicated when searching for a vehicle with a verified combat history. The deep, metallic sound of the engine remains a hallmark of its presence, demanding attention wherever the heavy wheels turn. One American-built truck earned legendary status not on its own soil, but in the icy wilderness of the Soviet Union. This transition to the next level of heavy transport reveals how international cooperation shaped the motorized face of the conflict. The metal remains cold, waiting for the next ignition sequence in the frozen north. Thus, the history of the Matador concludes its chapter, clearing the path for another legendary hauler to take the stage. 200,000 units of the Studebaker US6 were manufactured by the Studebaker Corporation during the period spanning from 1941 to 1945. This machine established itself as one of the most critical military transport vehicles utilized throughout the Second World War. Why did an American-made truck achieve its greatest legendary status thousands of miles away from its point of origin? The Lend-Lease program facilitated the massive transfer of these vehicles to the Soviet Union, where they became the backbone of logistical operations. But this is just the beginning. Only a small number of these trucks survive today in their original military configuration. One can notice how most of the fleet was either destroyed during intense combat or later modified for civilian industrial use after the conflict ended. This makes the discovery of an authentic, unmodified model an incredibly rare event for historians. It seems simple to identify a military truck, but in reality, finding one with its original specifications intact is nearly impossible. A 6-cylinder Hercules JXD gasoline engine serves as the heart of the vehicle, featuring a displacement of 5.7 liters. The power plant produces 94 horsepower and provides significant low-end torque for heavy hauling. The camera glides along the engine block where the mechanical components operate with heavy, rhythmic precision. This torque was essential for moving heavy loads across unforgiving and unpredictable terrain. It gets more complex further on. 45 miles per hour was the maximum speed of the Studebaker US6 on open roads. While this figure seems modest, it was more than sufficient for its primary role as a reliable transporter in war zones. The vehicle utilized a 5-speed manual transmission coupled with a 2-speed transfer case to manage power distribution. Its 6x6 drivetrain provided the high-level off-road performance required for the most difficult environments. The equipment gradually maneuvers through deep snow, thick ice, and the notorious mud of the Soviet landscape. Classic military leaf springs were installed at all 4 corners of the chassis to handle the suspension requirements. This durable setup was specifically designed to endure long-distance hauls while carrying maximum weight capacities. The engineering was focused entirely on practical utility rather than aesthetics. Steel or wood flatbeds were mounted to the rear, often covered by removable canvas tops to protect cargo from the elements. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the environmental extremes these trucks endured. One can notice the no-frills design of the cabin and the wide tires designed for maximum traction on soft ground. The rhythmic sound of the engine became a constant presence for Soviet troops during the advancement of the front lines. Many soldiers began referring to the vehicle as the American Camel, due to its perceived ability to travel vast distances under brutal conditions. The process of logistical transport relied on these machines to move fuel, ammunition, food, and personnel. Transition to the next level. The US-6 proved its worth in Arctic campaigns where local vehicular technology frequently failed to operate in the extreme cold. Some of these trucks were so structurally durable that they remained in active service in remote regions of Siberia until the 1970s. Restoring one of these survivors to its original military specification today represents a monumental technical task for any collector. Complete examples are extremely scarce and command a significant premium at international auctions and within private collections. The metal remains a testament to the engineering standards of the mid-20th century. 150 horsepower would be the standard for later models, but the original 94 horsepower of the US-6 was the foundation of its success. The vehicle exits the historical stage as one of the most resilient transport platforms ever built. The journey of the steel and wood components concludes here, having traveled from American factories to the farthest reaches of the Eastern Front. This concludes the operational history of a machine that defined an era of motorized warfare. 500,000 units of the GMCCK W353 rolled off the assembly lines of General Motors between the years 1941 and 1945. This 6x6 vehicle, famously designated as the Jimmy by American troops, functioned as the primary logistical backbone for the United States military across both the European and Pacific theaters of operation. Why did a single vehicle model become the ubiquitous face of Allied transport during massive undertakings like the D-Day landings and the grueling Italian campaign? While the sheer volume of production might suggest these trucks are common today, finding a completely original specimen in full working order with verified wartime documentation remains an exceptionally rare occurrence. In reality, the vast majority of these machines located outside of the United States were either scrapped for metal or heavily modified for civilian use immediately following the conclusion of global hostilities. 104 horsepower is generated by the 6-cylinder 4.4-liter gasoline engine housed beneath the narrow hood. This power plant delivers torque in a strictly linear fashion, allowing the truck to traverse steep inclines and deep muddy terrain even when the cargo bed is loaded to its maximum capacity. At first glance, a top speed of 45 miles per hour may seem modest, but it represented a highly respectable performance standard for a logistical vehicle of this specific size and era. But this is just the beginning of its mechanical capabilities. The drivetrain utilizes a 5-speed manual transmission coupled with a low-range transfer case to ensure that power is available exactly when the terrain demands it. One can notice how the 6x6 configuration with inter-axle differentials provides constant traction across all 3 axles simultaneously. It is visible how the heavy-duty leaf spring suspension systems absorb the shocks of bombed-out roads and jagged mountain trails, maintaining the structural integrity of the chassis under extreme stress. The camera glides along the split windshield and the distinctive dual rear wheels that define its iconic profile. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the sheer variety of roles this chassis fulfilled on the front lines. The Jimmy was not merely a cargo hauler. The base platform was adapted into mobile workshops, field ambulances, fuel tankers, and even mobile platforms for rocket launchers. The metallic clatter of the valves and the pervasive scent of gasoline became the constant sensory background for millions of soldiers serving on every Allied front. It only looks obvious that such a versatile tool would be preserved, but in reality, many were sold for a few dollars or donated to international rebuilding efforts after 1945. Restoring a Jimmy to its exact military specifications today necessitates the acquisition of rare components and a high level of specialized technical expertise. This scarcity of authentic parts significantly increases the market value of surviving units among historical collectors and museums. The process of maintaining these heavy machines requires constant attention to the cooling systems and gearboxes to prevent mechanical failure during operation. The truck remains a testament to mid-century industrial mobilization and engineering durability. If the Jimmy served as the versatile right hand of the Allied war machine, the subsequent vehicle in the logistical chain was a heavy-duty British recovery specialist specialist designed specifically to retrieve disabled artillery and armor from the battlefield. The transition to the next level of heavy transport involves even greater scales of power and recovery equipment. These British machines provided the necessary brute force to ensure that the heaviest guns remained mobile throughout the conflict. The movement of the Allied forces depended entirely on this layered hierarchy of specialized transport and recovery vehicles. 2,900 pounds is the approximate weight of a single heavy-duty tire on some of the largest recovery vehicles of the era, but the entire Scammell Pioneer weighs over 26,000 pounds. Why did a civilian heavy hauler become the backbone of British military logistics during the Second World War? It seems simple to adapt a commercial truck for the front lines, but in reality, the transition required a complete engineering shift toward low-end torque rather than logistical speed. Originally developed in the late 1920s by the manufacturer Scammell Lorries, this machine began its life serving industrial transport needs before the outbreak of global conflict necessitated its military conversion. But this is just the beginning. The vehicle was engineered for sheer pulling power to navigate ruined battlefields where traction was non-existent. One can notice the oversized fenders and the tall, squared-off stance that gave the truck the silhouette of a battlefield tractor. Under the long hood sits a 6-cylinder diesel engine with a displacement of 8.7 liters. While it produces only 102 horsepower, these modest numbers hide the massive torque required to move 30-ton tanks through deep mud and debris. Everything only gets more complicated when the terrain turns vertical. A 6-speed manual transmission equipped with a specialized low-range system provides drivers with microscopic control over every rotation of the wheels. The truck utilizes a 6x4 layout, meaning the two rear axles are powered while the front axle handles the steering. It only looks obvious that a 6x6 system would be superior, but in reality, the Scammell Pioneer achieved exceptional effectiveness through a simplified design and superior weight distribution. Leaf spring suspension on all three axles was specifically built to survive brutal punishment and extreme vertical loads. The process is only gaining momentum. One can notice the heavy metal components vibrating as the deep diesel rumble fills the air, accompanied by the distinct squeal of the clutch under a heavy load. This unmistakable battlefield sound signaled the arrival of a recovery mission tasked with towing disabled armor back from the front lines. Beyond tank recovery, the Pioneer served as a primary mover for long-range artillery, heavy bridging equipment, and specialized engineering tools across unmapped landscapes. It does not end at this stage. After the conclusion of the war, many of these units were repurposed for civilian labor in logging, mining, and construction, particularly within former British colonies. However, intact military models featuring the original rear winch system and unmodified bodywork have become exceptionally rare. This rarity was reflected when a fully restored operational Scammell Pioneer was sold at a military auction in Scotland for over £90,000. The material leaves the furnace of history, transitioning into a calm stage of preservation. 185 horsepower is the output generated by the heavy diesel engine of the Diamond T Company's flagship military vehicle. Why would such a relatively low horsepower figure be considered revolutionary for a truck built between 1941 and 1945? The answer lies not in speed, but in the immense torque required to transport 40-ton Sherman tanks across devastated landscapes. But this is just the beginning. The heart of this machine is a Hercules inline 6-cylinder diesel engine displacing 14.7 liters. One can notice how the oversized pistons move with a slow, deliberate cadence that produces a deep growl. It only looks obvious that a truck should be fast, but in reality, this vehicle was engineered for a top speed of only 28 miles per hour. The process of moving the immovable is only gaining momentum. 10 gears within a manual transmission provide the necessary mechanical advantage. The operator utilizes a dual-range setup to access low-end grunt for extreme towing scenarios. It is visible how the 6x4 drivetrain engages both rear axles simultaneously to maintain traction on soft soil. The equipment gradually overcomes resistance as the heavy-duty leaf spring suspension compresses under the weight of armored vehicles. Everything only gets more complicated as the load increases. At first glance, the massive fenders and high, wide hood seem like stylistic choices, but they house a cooling system designed for continuous heavy labor. The truck alone weighs over 29,000 pounds without any cargo. This massive self-weight ensures that the wheels maintain contact with the ground, providing superb stability. Transition to the next level. The vehicle saw extensive deployment throughout the European and Pacific theaters of the Second World War. Logistics routes across American military bases were constantly occupied by these machines, which soldiers soldiers nicknamed the tractor truck. One can notice how the reinforced metal cab sits high above the oversized dual rear wheels. Their performance was so reliable that modified variants remained in active service through the 1960s. Today, finding an operational 9080 or 9081 model in its original configuration is a statistical anomaly. Most of these units were dismantled or scavenged for parts after the conclusion of the war. Only a few survive in historically accurate condition, making them highly sought after at specialized auctions. It gets more complex further on. $120,000 is a price some collectors are willing to pay for a fully restored example. A specific unit, complete with its original military trailer, was documented at a California auction recently. This particular sale reached the headlines of various technical and historical publications due to the rarity of the machine. The restoration process ensures that the deep engine growl can still be heard today. Thus, the legacy of one of the most powerful military transport vehicles remains preserved in the few existing specimens. The machine concludes its historical journey as a pinnacle of 1940s engineering. 7.5 tons of towing capacity across a 6x6 drive system made the Mac No an overbuilt machine that few individuals outside the military ever had the opportunity to operate. When evaluating sheer intimidating presence, very few military trucks throughout history have ever come close to the Mac No 7.5 ton 6x6. Why was this specific model engineered with such an aggressive and durable architecture? While standard transport vehicles handled personnel and supplies, the Mac No was constructed between 1940 and 1945 for a singular high-stakes mission. It was tasked with hauling the absolute heaviest artillery pieces within the United States military arsenal. Brute strength and rugged construction transformed this vehicle into a vital warhorse operating behind the front lines. One can notice how the long hood stretches forward, housing a massive 6-cylinder gasoline engine designed in-house by Mack. This EY model engine displaced 707 cubic inches, which is equivalent to approximately 11 6/10 liters of volume. It generated around 170 horsepower while producing immense levels of torque at low revolutions per minute. But this is just the beginning. It seems simple to imagine a truck towing a trailer, but in reality, this engine was tailor-made to pull 155mm howitzers and 240mm cannons. The equipment even handled the immense weight of dismantled railguns across broken terrain. A top speed of around 34 miles per hour was maintained by the driver, which proved more than adequate for these specialized heavy hauling roles. The truck was equipped with a 5-speed manual gearbox paired with a 2-speed transfer case. This configuration provided full-time 6x6 drive, ensuring that traction remained outstanding even in the most unforgiving environments. The process of moving heavy artillery only gets more complicated when the road disappears. One can notice how the Mac No excelled in deep mud, on steep inclines, and across terrain scarred by shell craters. Heavy-duty leaf spring suspension was utilized across all 3 axles to support the weight. These springs were built to carry truly absurd loads while maintaining precise driver control over the steering and braking systems. Visually, the Mac No appeared like a rolling bunker due to its high hood, vertical grille, and a cabin that was notably narrow but tall. Massive military tires supported a frame that weighed close to 20,000 pounds, even when the cargo bed was completely empty. This sheer mass gave the vehicle an unstoppable look and feel as it moved across the landscape. The engine emitted a deep, rhythmic growl, while the scent of gasoline and industrial grease defined the very identity of the machine. Almost exclusively, the Mac No served in heavy artillery transport missions, often functioning undercover where the largest guns needed repositioning. It also functioned as a versatile recovery platform. Everything only gets more complex when a vehicle becomes stuck or breaks down in thick mud. The Mac No used its torque to pull these disabled machines back to safety or repair depots. Today, the Mac No is considered extremely rare, particularly within the borders of the United States. Following the conclusion of the war, many of these units were unfortunately scrapped for metal or stripped of their specialized components. Surviving examples that retain their original bodies and factory powertrains are incredibly difficult for historians to locate. 100% original parts are the gold standard for collectors in this market. At a military vehicle auction held in Nevada, one fully restored Mac No, which included a military trailer and matching identification numbers, sold for over $95,000. The buyer was a private private collector who possessed a deep appreciation for the specialized artillery haulers of the Second World War. If the capabilities of this American beast are impressive, the next truck in the series is even rarer and stronger. It features engineering that pushed far beyond the established limits of its time. The history of heavy military transport remains a testament to such specialized engineering. Thus ends one of the key stages of this heavy vehicle overview. 176 hundredths of a liter of displacement, specifically 17.6 liters, defines the massive heart of the Tatra 813 Koloss 8x8. Among Cold War military vehicles, few machines command the same level of presence or technical innovation as this heavy transporter. The Czechoslovakian manufacturer Tatra began production of this model in 1967. Why did the Warsaw Pact rely so heavily on this specific platform for its most critical mobile assets? The answer lies in its ability to carry everything from ballistic missile systems to massive mobile radar stations across environments that would destroy standard logistics vehicles. At first glance, the truck appears to be a rigid fortress on wheels, but the engineering beneath the surface tells a different story. Central to its design is the signature backbone chassis, a hollow tube that houses the entire drivetrain while providing immense torsional flexibility. This allows the frame to twist and adapt to uneven terrain without the risk of structural snapping or permanent deformation. A V12 air-cooled diesel engine provides 270 horsepower and immense torque. One can notice how the cooling fins on the cylinders dissipate heat without the need for a vulnerable radiator system. This makes the power plant ideal for the extreme temperature fluctuations found in high mountains or frozen Siberian plains. But this is just the beginning of its mechanical complexity. Manual shifting requires the operation of 20 distinct gears. 10 standard gears are each equipped with high and low ranges, managed through a system of dual levers within the elevated cab. Such a wide range of ratios allows the 29,000-pound vehicle to transition from a slow, controlled crawl over boulders to steady cruising on open roads. It is visible how the independent suspension on all 4 axles utilizes a combination of torsion bars and swing arms. This configuration ensures that each of the 8 wheels maintains constant contact with the ground, regardless of the obstacles in its path. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the load capacities of this 8x8 drivetrain. The empty weight of the chassis sits at 29,000 pounds, yet it can haul over 55,000 pounds of cargo depending on the specific military configuration. Soviet and Eastern Bloc militaries deployed the Koloss as a primary platform for Scud missile launchers and heavy bridge-laying systems. The low, growling tone of the V12 engine was a constant presence in the Carpathians and across the sprawling military zones of the era. It only looks obvious to operate such a machine, but in reality, the maintenance of these units is a logistical challenge. After the Cold War, a significant number of these trucks were decommissioned and left to the elements. The process is only gaining momentum as collectors realize that the expertise required to service these mechanical systems is slowly fading away. Why has the market value for a functioning Koloss reached such astronomical heights in recent years? Original spare parts are increasingly scarce, making a fully operational unit a rare crown jewel for any serious military vehicle collector. Recently, a single Tatra 813 in original condition was sold at a specialized auction in Poland for more than 110,000 euros. Bidders from Germany, Norway, and Canada competed for the vehicle, proving that its reputation has spread far beyond its original borders. The equipment gradually transitions from a utilitarian tool of war into a historical monument of engineering. If the Koloss functioned as a mobile fortress, the next machine in the sequence represents a rolling battering ram forged in the Soviet Union. The transition to the next level of heavy transport reveals even more aggressive designs intended for the front lines. One can notice the dust settling on the history of these steel giants as they move from active service to private collections. The metal is ready for the next stage of its journey through history. 240 horsepower and a massive low-end torque define the mechanical heart of the Kraz 255B 6x6. Why did this specific machine become the primary heavy hauler for the Soviet military starting in 1965? One might assume speed was the priority for frontline logistics, but in the Siberian taiga, velocity is secondary to pure survivability. The Kremenchug automobile plant engineered a chassis capable of carrying over 12 tons of cargo across terrain that would swallow lesser vehicles. The massive frame and snarling engine profile emerged from the factory as a definitive symbol of industrial might. A Yams 238 V8 diesel engine provides the propulsion, displacing 14.9 liters. This power plant allows the vehicle vehicle to conquer mud, deep snow, and river crossings without losing momentum. The 6x6 full-time drive system works in tandem with enormous off-road tires to maintain traction on the harshest surfaces. One can notice how the deep tread patterns bite into the soft earth, propelling 12 tons of steel forward at a top speed of 43 miles per hour. But this is just the beginning. The transmission system consists of a 5-speed manual gearbox paired with a 2-speed auxiliary unit. This configuration provides the driver with 10 distinct gear combinations to manage any topographical challenge. It seems like a simple mechanical arrangement, but in reality, it allows the truck to crawl through obstacles that would immobilize modern transport. Locking differentials are integrated across all axles to ensure that power is never wasted on a spinning wheel. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the sheer mass of the construction. An empty vehicle weighs over 24,000 pounds, yet it possesses the structural integrity to handle a fully loaded weight exceeding 44,000 pounds. The leaf spring suspension is built with reinforced shock absorbers specifically designed to withstand relentless abuse in active combat zones. It is visible how the tall cab with its split windshield and massive fenders creates an unmistakable silhouette against the horizon. The engine emits a loud, rhythmic rattling that precedes the truck's arrival, a sound familiar from the forests of Siberia to the arid deserts of Central Asia. It only looks obvious that such a machine would be common, but today it is one of the rarest military trucks in Europe. Global exports sent these units to Cuba, Vietnam, Syria, and Angola during various Cold War conflicts. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the vast majority of these trucks were abandoned in remote regions or stripped for their heavy components. Finding a fully original specimen with an intact drivetrain and bodywork is now considered nearly impossible for modern restorers. This scarcity has caused market values to rise sharply among international collectors. At first glance, these are merely old transport vehicles, but in reality, they have become high-value historical artifacts. A pristine, restored unit reached a valuation of over $150,000 at a 22 military expo in Germany. This price reflects the skyrocketing demand for authentic Soviet-era engineering within Western markets. The process of preservation is only gaining momentum as fewer functional examples remain. While this rolling wall of steel dominates the landscape, the technical evolution of the era produced even larger machines. The narrative now transitions to a Cold War titan designed for the transport of nuclear warheads, pushing the limits of mechanical engineering even further. 8 wheels and 8 independent points of contact with the Earth. This was the standard of mobility established by the West German engineering firm Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg during the intensification of the Cold War. Why would a military force require such an over-engineered heavy truck in the late 1970s? The modernization program of that era demanded a platform capable of traversing active minefields and deep snow at high speeds while under enemy fire. One can notice the rigid, uncompromising geometry of its steel frame, which was designed to survive the most extreme battlefield conditions imaginable. But this is just the beginning of its mechanical complexity. The Cat 1 was propelled by a MAN D2566 diesel engine, an inline 8-cylinder configuration with a displacement of 12 liters. It generated 320 horsepower, but the true advantage lay in the massive torque produced at low revolutions per minute. This power reached the ground through a full-time 8x8 drivetrain, allowing the vehicle to transport over 20 tons of equipment across shifting sand, jagged, broken ground, or thick ice. It only looks obvious to call it a transport, but in reality, it was a high-speed logistical juggernaut. 56 miles per hour was the top speed achieved by this 35,000-pound machine. This velocity was maintained by a fully automatic 8-speed transmission integrated with a torque converter to ensure smooth power delivery regardless of the weight being hauled. The drivetrain utilized locking differentials on every one of the 4 axles to prevent loss of traction in mud or silt. Heavy-duty leaf spring suspension systems were paired with hydraulic dampers, ensuring the chassis remained stable during high-speed maneuvers. The process of stabilization is only gaining momentum as the truck moves from paved roads to open terrain. Every line of the high-clearance body followed the philosophy of pure function. The cab featured bullet-resistant plating and enough space to seat 4 soldiers in full gear. Because chemical and radiation threats were a reality of the period, the interior could be equipped with optional nuclear, biological, and chemical protection systems. The rear platform served as a modular foundation for mobile radar arrays, missile launch systems, or standard cargo containers. One can notice how the oversized wheels allow the truck to clear obstacles that would stop smaller vehicles. NATO forces deployed the Cat 1 extensively during large-scale military exercises across the European continent. These trucks transitioned from drill drills to real-world combat operations in the Balkans during the 1990s. While Germany remained the primary user, small numbers of the 8x8 variant were exported to the military forces of Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. It seems simple to track such large machines, but in reality, original military specification survivors are nearly impossible to find today. Most of these vehicles were eventually scrapped or stripped of their specialized equipment for conversion into civilian heavy haulers. When a complete unit with its original military systems appears on the market, collectors pay a significant premium for the rarity. A single restored Cat 1 in Norway, finished in its original military paint, reached a price of over $180,000 at a private auction. The buyer intended to utilize the vehicle for deep-sea ice expeditions in the Arctic. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the final vehicle in this series. $150,000 was the amount spent by a single American collector just to extract the next vehicle from a former Soviet base. That machine exists in a category of its own, defined by its extreme scale and rarity. The transition to this final level of heavy machinery reveals a truck so colossal, it dwarfs even the German 8x8. The steel remains cold and silent, but the engineering legacy continues to move forward into the next stage of the narrative. $150,000 is the exact sum spent by a private collector just to extract a single vehicle from a former Soviet base and legalize it on foreign soil. Why would anyone pay such a staggering price for a piece of aging machinery? It seems like an excessive investment for a truck, but the MAZ 537 is not a standard logistical vehicle. This Cold War mega machine was engineered with such immense scale and power that even heavy tanks were forced to yield to its path during military maneuvers. The production of this 8x8 heavy hauler began in 1959 at the Minsk automobile plant, known as MAZ, before the manufacturing responsibility shifted to the KZKT plant in Kurgan. It was never intended for simple transport tasks. The Soviet military doctrine required a platform capable of carrying the primary assets of its strategic arsenal, including heavy tanks, ballistic missiles, and mobile nuclear launch platforms. The heart of this mechanical giant is a D12A 525A V12 diesel engine. The displacement of this power plant reaches an astronomical 38.8 liters, which is nearly 2,400 cubic inches. One can notice how the sheer volume of the cylinders allows the engine to produce 525 horsepower and immense torque. This enables the machine to tow loads exceeding 50 tons across frozen Siberian rivers, shifting sand dunes, or destroyed roadways without losing momentum. The process is only gaining momentum as the mechanical systems engage. The transmission utilizes a hydromechanical automatic design featuring 3 forward and 1 reverse gear, specifically engineered to ensure smooth shifting while operating under extreme weight and battlefield pressure. It is visible how the 8x8 full-time drive system maintains traction using locking differentials across all 4 axles. At first glance, the control system appears complex, but in reality, it allowed the driver to adjust tire pressure directly from the cabin to adapt to changing soil density. Suspension systems were built using reinforced leaf springs, balancing high load capacity with the flexibility needed for broken terrain. The vehicle measures over 30 feet in length and nearly 10 feet in height, with a curb weight reaching close to 50,000 pounds while empty. Inside the forward-positioned cab, there is seating for 4 crew members, often accompanied by radiation shielding and specialized military-grade instrumentation. The engine produces a low-frequency vibration that is physically felt through the chassis, but this is just the beginning of its operational history. During the Cold War, the MAZ 537 operated across the entire Eastern Bloc, transporting T-72 and T-80 tanks along with bridging equipment and missile systems. The equipment gradually proved its reliability in temperatures reaching -40 degrees Fahrenheit in the Siberian tundra and the suffocating heat of Central Asian deserts. It remained a cornerstone of Soviet mobility because it almost never suffered mechanical failure under standard operation. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, only a small number of these units entered the private market. Restoring such a machine is a logistical nightmare because spare parts are extremely rare and technical knowledge remains locked within old military manuals. One can notice the difficulty of legal transport, which remains a highly regulated and expensive endeavor. Everything only gets more complicated when crossing international borders. In 2021, a fully restored unit with its matching military trailer and original documentation was sold at a private auction in Germany for over 100,000 euros. This preceded the report of an American collector who spent over $150,000 $50,000 to acquire, import, and legalize a single unit in the United States. This price reflects the status of the vehicle as a legendary relic of the nuclear age and a superweapon on wheels. The molten history of the Cold War lives on in these massive steel frames as they transition into private collections. 10 legends of military engineering conclude their journey through the technical history of the 20th century. These machines represent the peak of industrial design, having been manufactured to withstand the most hostile environments on the planet. Why did these specific models become the primary logistical backbone for global superpowers? At first glance, they appear to be simple transport vehicles, but in reality, their chassis and drivetrains were engineered to survive nuclear transport and Arctic expeditions. The answer lies in their specialized construction, where every bolt and hydraulic line was designed for field repair under fire. Preservation efforts continue in specialized workshops across the globe. One can notice how restorers painstakingly calibrate the fuel injection systems of multi-fuel engines to original factory specifications. These mechanical giants do not merely exist as museum pieces. They serve as functional records of Cold War metallurgy and heavy-duty transmission development. It is visible how the heavy steel frames, some weighing over 15 tons, remain free of structural fatigue after decades of service. The process of maintaining such rare equipment is only gaining momentum as more collectors acquire these relics from decommissioned stockpiles. Automated sandblasting systems remove layers of olive drab paint to reveal the high-strength alloys beneath. Engineers observe the wear patterns on the massive planetary gears, which once propelled these vehicles through tropical mud and frozen tundra. This meticulous attention to detail ensures that the mechanical legacy of the previous century is not lost to oxidation. But this is just the beginning of the long-term conservation process for such heavy hardware. The technical evolution of these platforms laid the groundwork for modern off-road engineering and heavy recovery systems. Precise torque ratings and load-bearing capacities are recorded in technical manuals that collectors study with the same intensity as the original military operators. Everything only gets more complicated as parts become increasingly scarce, necessitating the custom fabrication of components. 100% of the original functionality is the goal for most high-end restoration projects. It is visible how the massive rubber tires, often standing 5 feet tall, are replaced with modern equivalents to ensure safety during public demonstrations. The mechanical roar of a 12-cylinder diesel engine marks the successful completion of a multi-year overhaul. Thus, the era of the classic military truck transitioned into a phase of historical reverence and technical study. The machines are prepared for their final roles as educational exhibits and private icons of 20th century power. From here, the focus shifts to the next generation of specialized vehicles that will continue the evolution of heavy transport. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste.